what is DHEA? It's a steroid hormone precursor to both testosterone and estrogen. But as we back up, it's actually coming through our diet. It's coming through cholesterol. Cholesterol is the main precursor that then converts down into something called pregnenolone. And once we get to pregnenolone, it diverges. One way, it goes on to progesterone and then cortisol. And the other direction, it moves on to DHEA. And DHEA is basically an acronym for dehydroepiandrosterone. It's a big, long name, so let's stick with DHEA. And DHEA converts into testosterone and to estrogen. So what's the role of DHEA? It does many different things in the body, but understanding one of the key roles is to appreciate the fact that it's staying in balance, or should be trying to stay in balance, with cortisol. So as we drive that gas pedal of stress hormone and drive up cortisol, DHEA should be there to sort of balance the equation. And as we've talked about many times, cortisol tends to drive the bus, so to speak, for many of us as a result of modern life and expectations for work and bringing in income to supporting a family and dealing with all the external factors that are stressing our bodies out. It's not uncommon, and staying up late. That's another big one, obviously, for high cortisol, low DHEA. All of these things are going to be contributing factors to affecting the speed or the rate of decline of DHEA. So as most of us maybe remember, or we're currently experiencing because we're in our 20s, we're usually feeling our best. Hormones are really rising to the occasion up until around the age 25 to 30. The prefrontal cortex, that higher functioning executive function of our brain, is really coming together. So we should be all systems go by the time we hit our 25 to 30 year old range. And then with many hormones, many nutrients like NAD or nitric oxide, or the hormones that we talk about often, a lot of these things start to decline as we get over this sort of hump. So one could say that that's the best of our hormonal years. But what we find is, in practice, is there's so much that we can do to optimize our hormones naturally and sometimes through supplementation that allows us to really accentuate that state, that optimal state, well into our 40s, 50s, and beyond. And that's what I'm interested in. I want to be playing with my kids and grandkids with a ton of vitality, for as long as possible. And whenever that day is that I'm no longer here, well, hopefully I can say that I live my best and live without pain and live without illness and dis-ease, because I've supported this system that's so important for all of us. And so hopefully we're imparting some of that philosophy into you as well. So obviously this stress hormone reality of cortisol, DHEA, eventually gets tipped in favor of cortisol to the point where DHEA starts to decline. And so you never want to address DHEA just on its own in isolation. There's so many reasons for why it can expedite and decline. And in our practice, we often see a lot of people struggling with poor digestive health. It might be really obvious, like irritable bowel disease like Crohn's, celiac, colitis, or it might be something a little bit more mild, but just as troublesome, potentially, with irritable bowel syndrome. We're just constantly having to go to the bathroom, just feeling like a chronic, maybe digestive upset or cramping or bloating or gassy, just feeling really uncomfortable. I mean, it's a sign of an inflammatory load on the body, which is going to burn out these sort of adaptive rebalancing hormones. So as we become more and more inflamed, or we get more depleted as a result of our poor lifestyle habits, maybe even known or unknown to us, the circadian rhythm stress, like I said, going to bed too late, waking up too early, or just going to bed too late in general, and just not really rebalancing that cortisol system. Oh, another example would be someone who's just really high or hyperglycemic, or constantly pushing in the sugar, the alcohol, or caffeine, and just really not nourishing themselves in their body. And so these hormones are really an adaptive tool to respond to the stresses that the body is under. And so you can imagine the many different things that would lead to or expedite the decline of this really important hormone. So as in the case of someone who's truly depleted, or more obviously depleted, you could look at the disease model of Addison's, which is understanding that this really important hormone, DHEA, is released in or through the adrenal system. So Addison's disease is basically hypofunctioning of these adrenal hormones. And so these people are massively fatigued when they get hit with an immune attack, whatever it may be. It's a real undertaking to get them back to feeling good again. And often they're having to supplement in cortisol or cortisone, Cortef, it's usually called, or hydrocortisone, is small multiple doses of this hormone cortisol throughout the day, and often DHEA could be added in too to someone's plan. A less severe version of low DHEA could be just adrenal insufficiency. So again, the adrenal glands, which sit on the top of the kidneys, are releasing a bunch of different hormones, from blood sugar balancing hormones to mineralocorticoids, which help to regulate blood pressure, to these sex hormones like DHEA, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. And so these hormones, as they get more and more depleted as a result of some of the factors we just mentioned, that can lead to an adrenal insufficiency, meaning that these people have a version of what could look like Addison's, but probably to a lesser degree. And so that could look like chronic fatigue, chronic immune insults, allergies, just feeling depleted all the time, brain fog, a lot of the things that you might see in Addison's. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you might see excess or high levels of DHEA, which could happen with an adrenal tumor potentially, but something maybe more common, especially for women, is PCOS. And this is polycystic ovarian syndrome. We have almost like an androgenization of women. So they might experience hair growth, weight gain, acne, maybe even alopecia or hair loss. And there's a version of that which could be all, again, lifestyle induced in men, might present a little bit differently. But the hallmark feature for women is that they're actually growing cysts on their ovaries. And this can be from this hyperadrenal or hyperandrogen function inside their bodies. So that's sort of like maybe more of a clinical example of someone who's in a hypo or true deficiency of DHEA and cortisol, versus someone who's in a more of an androgenic overwhelm or too much DHEA testosterone, which would be in the case of PCOS. So those are kind of some of the variations that can show up in one's life. I think, what we see in practice is that if people are not addressing some of the core reasons why they're chronically stressed or inflamed, DHEA typically is going to decline quite quickly. So the range here in Canada, anyways, is that the lower end of the range might be anywhere from 0 to upwards of 15 in someone who's in their, say, 40s, 50s. That range for where normal is for DHEA starts to decline in older populations. But generally speaking, when I see that DHEA marker get to, say, less than 5, less than 6, we know that, and that's typically men, but could also be for women. That's typically a sign that things are starting to get depreciated, meaning we've got less gas in the tank, we've got less resilience with that hormone that's so supportive for us. So we're going to talk a little bit about testing later on, but that was a reference to blood testing.